Okay, hi everyone. Hello. To give Ruzwana Bashir here a proper introduction, I will actually read her bio from the Future Talks. Ruzwana Bashir is a travel junkie who founded Peak.com to help consumers find the best experiences and to provide software for tour operators to come online. Peak has raised over 40 million in funding from tech heavyweights, including Google's Eric Schmidt, and Twitter's Jack Dorsey and TPG's David Bonderman. Before Peak, Ruzwana worked at Goldman Sachs and the Blackstone Group and has an MBA from Harvard Business School and degree in philosophy, politics, and economics from Oxford University. She's been named one of Fortune's most powerful women, entrepreneurs, and Fast Company's 100 most creative people. In 2014, Ruzwana made headlines internationally by writing an article in The Guardian where she told her story of sexual abuse. The article was published in the light of 2014 investigations into the sexual abuse of 1,400 children in Rotherham, England. And Bashir cited that the underreporting in the British Pakistani community and the taboos around the shame that perpetuated it. She's called upon the community to give victims the support they need to come forward and bring the perpetrators to justice. Welcome, Ruzwana.
Hi there.
It's an incredible story. Yeah, we're so glad to have you here, even though we couldn't offer you like the blow dryer in the morning. So, first question is, what's your morning routine like? Like, just to start, really simple.
Oh, wow. I wasn't expecting that one. I don't really, I was like, uh-oh, I'm not prepared in any way. I'm going to have to admit that I don't have any routines in life. I think one of the things about being an entrepreneur is that I might have to get up at like 4 in the morning to do a call if I have to, or it might be that I'm here and get to wake up at a reasonable hour. So I actually, one of the things I'm used to is not having any kind of routine. So I might work for 20 hours a day, and the next day I might be on a trip or on vacation. So I think the flexibility is there, so that the routine doesn't exist. It's not very healthy because you don't do a lot of exercise and you might not sleep as much as you want. But Personally, I don't need routines in order to be able to like function. And if anything, I want the flexibility of being able to make the most of every opportunity. And that might be with work or with something else. So it doesn't exist. The only things I'm routine about are when I go to restaurants and I order the exact same thing again and again. And my friends think that's weird. But,
I often do the same as well.
But everything else has no routine whatsoever.
So when you went to Oxford, you actually then changed your outfit to Western clothes for the very first time. How did that feel like, and why did you do it?
So I grew up in a very small community, and so my parents are originally from Pakistan. I moved from, they moved from Pakistan to the UK in a wave of immigration that we had in the 50s and 60s, and so they came from a very small, very conservative community. And so I grew up in an environment where actually, although I was growing up in England, ostensibly everybody around me was Pakistani. So every house, all my neighbors were all Pakistani. And so that meant that they really kept a lot of the original kind of values and ideas. And part of that was dress. And so I didn't wear Western clothes till I was 18 and I left home. Until then, I wore traditional shalwar kameez and covered my hair and wore kind of traditional Pakistani clothes. And that, that environment and growing up there actually probably gave me a great perspective about two different worlds. Growing up in a Pakistani community, which ostensibly was little Pakistan, through to being in the UK, which obviously has very, very different contexts. And so, when I was fortunate because although no one in my community was getting a lot of access to education, especially women, it was very patriarchal. I was fortunate because I did quite well at school. And in doing well at school, I had a teacher who had gone to Cambridge, and that really inspired me to try to apply. And so I applied to Oxford without telling my parents because I knew that probably wasn't something that they wanted me to do. But then I got in, and I was the only kid in my community that had ever gotten into Oxford, and so my parents let me go. And that kind of opportunity to go from this very small place where my dad sold fruit and vegetables, my mum didn't work, my mum still doesn't speak English after 40 years in England, to go from that place where, frankly, nobody I knew had ever gone to anything like that, and get to go to Oxford completely changed my life. And one aspect of that is that I was able to perhaps liberalize a little bit more in terms of dress, so like lots of dresses instead of shalwar kameez, but also was able to get this huge access to opportunity that I'd never thought of before. I think my world was so limited before I went to Oxford, and getting to Oxford meant that I suddenly knew that there was, there were Nobel Prize winners, and there were amazing politicians, or whatever it was. It was very, very inspiring for me to increase my perception of the opportunity in the world.
Where you also became the president of the Oxford Society?
Union,
Union, which is a famous debating society all over the world, actually, which presidents have gone to as well. Then you got a promising career in finance in Goldman Sachs and the Black Group. But what made you switch gears to start your own company and go to Silicon Valley?
Sure. I kind of, coming from a slightly different background, it meant that I felt the need to tick a lot of boxes, and so kind of needed to show people that I was smart and I could do that, could do a good job. And so I went in a very traditional career format, so investment banking and then private equity. And that was great in the sense that it gave me a lot of skills that I felt were very important to build my own business. I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but it was not so good in the sense that I didn't feel like I was creating value. So there's a lot of value capture because you're able to buy companies and change them around, but there's not the feeling of creating. And so for me, that was not compelling and interesting. So I basically moved to America to go to Harvard Business School and started to get really interested in entrepreneurship. And so I ended up being fortunate enough to work in a couple of startups in New York. Got the bug around Silicon Valley and decided to move with one suitcase to Silicon Valley with an idea I had to start hopefully building a company. And it's thankfully worked out quite well, but it was a bit of a risky idea.
Yeah, so how did the idea come about? Like how did Peak start it?
Yeah, so I went to Istanbul for a weekend with some friends, and I basically spent 20 hours planning the trip. And that was not, although it was fun to know that you were going to have this great experience, I was only there for 3 days, and so that 20-hour commitment felt like a bit much. And so, I was researching great things to do and trying to figure out who would be a great experience to have it with, finding the guides and the experiences. And I just didn't understand why it wasn't something I could just go online and easily book. What I recognized, and as I started digging into it, it was clear that a lot of the businesses in this space, it's about a $150 billion market globally, really hadn't come online. So whereas you might have had OpenTable for restaurants, bringing all of those online, you've got Booking.com for hotels, but you really didn't have anything for activities and experiences. And so I decided to start working on the idea to bring them online and make it very easy for consumers to book experiences. It also resonated with me personally, and I think we're in a generation which has really changed our outlook on how we want to spend our time. There was an era, where we all bought cars and houses, and a lot of the products that we bought defined our identity. Today, I think we are a very different kind of society, especially millennials, who want to spend their time doing experiences, things that help them create, help them get inspired, help them actually, learn new things. And so what was really powerful for me is we think about connecting the world through experiences. So how do we ensure that when people go to a new country or a new place, they can really interact with it and have an opportunity to build empathy by learning about a new culture, through to just having a great experience with their friends or family and those connections. So what was really exciting for me was to see, okay, this is a huge market. It's not got any big players yet. Let's bring it online, but let's also do, for me, a job that's very fulfilling because we get to inspire joy and happiness for people.
So clearly you're not a white male.
Not last time I checked.
Yeah. So what are some of the challenges you've been facing in Silicon Valley as a female minority tech entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think the Valley does get a little bit more flack than most areas for having not having a great representation of women, and I think unfortunately that is the case. I think a lot of other industries have that problem too. I think a lot of the problems actually stem from funding. So only about 2% of venture-backed companies have female founders and CEOs, and so I think there is a very natural thing when investors meet entrepreneurs that they have kind of some pattern matching, and if you don't fit into that pattern. And a lot of this is subconscious. It's not that any of us mean to kind of connect better with people who look like us, but that happens. And I think sometimes that means that when women are presented with opportunities, they're not, and go out and try and get investment, they're not necessarily getting the same treatment and opportunity that someone who's a white male might. I think that it is getting better. I think we've had some moments in entrepreneurship where people recognize that and are trying to change some of that. Also, I think, frankly, we have a huge issue with not enough women starting businesses. So we don't have enough women that go into technology, education, and we don't create a society which really inspires women to be able to create those things. So I think a lot of the opportunity that we have now is around helping mentor women who might want to be entrepreneurs and be leaders, as well as actually, looking at young women and young girls that might be at school still through to university and actually inspiring them that this is a route and that not everybody who starts a Silicon Valley tech company looks a certain way, and they could do that. So I think we definitely need better role models as well.
Do you have a favorite struggle of yours in your time in Silicon Valley?
Not a favorite because the struggles have never been that fun.
Yeah, but okay, but one you like to tell or something.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that in the end, there's probably the nature of startups is that it's a roller coaster. So I think before we started, you said, "Oh, well, what's it been like to spend $40 million? Have all that money." Well, it turns out you don't get it like that, right? You get it in these small batches, and there's this constant fear of survival because you're like, "Oh, I've got all these people that are working for me, and they're relying on us being able to build this, multi-billion-dollar, world-changing company, and we might not be able to pay the bills in 3 months." So I think a lot of the challenges I actually come from things like funding, which because everything else is a little bit more in your control. And I think as entrepreneurs, we found product market fit. So today we have hundreds of millions of dollars of bookings through our platform for activities. We work with thousands of businesses. We serve millions of customers. And so actually the product really works. People love that. But being able to translate that into ensuring that investors or other partners want to work with you is harder. So, we now work with Yelp. We've got a partnership with Reserve with Google, which will allow you to be able to search for activities on Yelp and Google and be able to book them through Peak. So those kind of things, I think, all have been probably the biggest challenges, have been able to persuade people that you're credible, both to provide access to resources, but also get these partnerships so that you can get access to wider distribution. So I think those have been the biggest challenges. And then more generally, it's just about building a team. This is my first startup, so I didn't necessarily know how to do a lot of things, and frankly, you just make a lot of mistakes, and you have to be comfortable with that. And I think especially as the CEO, the phases of the company are so different when you've got 15 people through to having a much larger team and having to kind of scale yourself up. So that has been both challenging and fun, actually.
Do you have any favorite advice for female founders? Do you have any advice?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest thing I'd say is before you even become female founders, it's about taking risks. So I think one thing that's been important for me in my career is being willing to take risks that might not pay off. And I think, famously, there's other people that say that. Eric Schmidt's one of my investors, and the big story at Google was always, it's a rocket ship, get on, don't care about the position. And I think that is very true. And I think being willing to take risks in your career that might not pay off and frankly, that you don't feel you're ready for, are very important. I think one of the big disconnects we have with men and women often is that women are not as willing to put themselves forward for things that they don't feel they're already prepared for. Actually, we do have to do that because that's when you grow and you challenge yourself and you have a ton of personal development. So I think most of it for me is around, you might not think you're ready for something and it's pretty scary, but you should still jump in and do it. I think more generally, beyond women, I think it's actually saying to all the men in the room, try and make sure that you're mentoring women. Mentorship has been shown to be one of the big ways in which people have the support to move forward. And I think, certainly coming to Silicon Valley, not really knowing anyone, and not really necessarily feeling like I connected with people. It was kind of hard. You've got a different accent, you look different, and it was hard to connect with people. And I think that was, I've never really had necessarily mentors, and it would have been really amazing to have that and have people to look to for advice. And I think that comes from women and men, actually, because, frankly, there aren't enough women in senior leadership positions, so we actually need men to step up. And that leadership takes a few things. It's more than just, often you'll have men go out for drinks in the evening, and perhaps women in a group might not be included, especially now that we've had some things come out with, Me Too and other things. People are a little bit more cautious. But it's okay to not go for drinks with women, but then you better make sure that you're going for breakfasts and lunches and other environments, and you're actually treating the men and women in your team equally. So I think that today we have an opportunity to allow more access, not only for women, but also minority groups. One of the areas that is really underserved is African Americans and Hispanics in the US, and that's a huge opportunity for us to do more. So I think it's really taking the people who have huge potential and putting energy and effort behind mentoring them.
Oh, time flies. Crazy. Yeah. Okay. I just start right on this question. It's like we might not have time for it, but I mentioned the article that you wrote in 2014 about the sexual abuse and the Rotterdam report. Why did you write it?
Yeah, sure. So I'll try my best
in 1 minute.
Yeah, totally.
2 minutes.
The context is just that I think we've had. Me Too come through, but about a few years ago, I, as somebody who was able to get a very big opportunity to improve my life and go to Oxford and do all these things, had actually been abused, when I was growing up by somebody in my community. And so I ended up going back after finishing HBS and pursuing a criminal case against my abuser. And so he ended up going to jail for 5.5 years. And so I kind of actually did that very privately. And it was something that I frankly didn't talk to anyone about, including my good friends. And then something happened in the UK, the Rotherham Report, which was pretty big for the UK around abuse of children, predominantly by Pakistani men. And so I felt a real moral obligation to speak up because, frankly, especially women and women from kind of Muslim communities or Pakistani communities found it quite difficult to overcome cultures of shame in order to be able to talk about abuse. And so having been somebody who had seen it happen in my own community and had seen the positive impact, there have been 2 or 3 other young women who had come out in my community about being abused after my court case. And so I felt there was an opportunity and a moral obligation to speak out. And so I ended up writing an article for The Guardian, which The Guardian published in their front page, and it was shared and read by 1 million people, and that allowed me to be able to start having a voice for areas that were perhaps outside of my original domain, but allowed me to hopefully have a positive impact. And that was quite good for me because it allowed me to be more authentic in who I am and to talk about an issue that's actually pretty important. But second, it also allowed me to be able to help others. And so one thing that was kind of very surprising about that article was just how many people I heard from, but they weren't the people that I expected. I expected Muslims or people from similar communities to be reaching out to me. In the end, I heard from everybody from all over the world, men and women. So it might be somebody from Nigeria, it might be somebody from Japan or Switzerland. And I actually realized these cultures of shame around abuse existed everywhere. So my perception had been very much, maybe this is an issue and these are the specific things we need to do within the context of the Pakistani community or the Muslim community. Actually, it turns out, and we see this with the Catholic Church and a lot of, there's been some revelations in Pennsylvania about 1,000 kids being abused by priests in the US. This is actually pretty pervasive. And so for me, it made me realize just how much suffering we have in the world around these issues because we don't talk about it and because people feel very isolated and very alone. And so my opportunity, and I think, it was a moment for me to be able to share something that allowed me to connect a lot more with people. And so I heard stories from lots of people. There were many people that I knew that started court cases themselves to prosecute abuse and were able, I think, to feel a lot more empowered. And so, it was before Me Too happened, but I was not surprised when the Me Too movement happened because I'd heard from so many people about their harassment or their abuse. So I think we are in a turning point where we're willing to talk about these issues and I think therefore start to move to eradicate them as well.
We got some more minutes for questions, but one last question from me. Like, why did you say yes to go to this trip to Svalbard?
Well, I do activities as my job, and so the idea of going on an Arctic adventure and getting to see polar bears, I felt was both, probably helping my work whilst also being an incredible adventure and fun to have. Yeah. Also, I think that, I very much agree with Celia that you have to have cross-disciplinary approaches to tackle the problems of the day. I think when you are an entrepreneur or working in technology, it can be very easy to just focus on what you're doing. But we all have an obligation to make the world better, right? Ultimately, I think we've been very lucky to any of us to be in this room. I certainly feel incredibly fortunate to have the journey that I've had. And so part of that journey is being able to give back to others. And so I do think there are some really big challenging problems that we can all contribute to. And I'm excited to be able to do that over the next few days.
Great, thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience? No? Oh, yes, yes.
How many, so you've democratized people who provide activities, which is unbelievable. How many partners do you have around the world who actually are, and what's, if there is an average size, what's the average size of that company that now finds a home on your platform?
Great question. So we work with thousands of businesses. Today, they're primarily in the US and in Mexico because we've got most of our bases in the US. And that's about a $30 billion market. And so the businesses that we work with provide services that range from zip lining or whitewater rafting. Right now, we don't have any polar bears, but we do have dog sledding, if you guys want to do that. And so we haven't made it to Europe yet. Most of the businesses are actually very small. They do a few $100,000 to a few $1 million of bookings. And they're typically really entrepreneurs. And one of the things that we've seen is that, especially these kind of segments, people aren't very sophisticated with technology. And so a lot of them hadn't made the move online because, frankly, it was so intimidating, right? So I might have had a family business where for 50 years we've been the best people to provide hot air balloon rides in the area that we're in. But I don't know how I do online booking or how I find customers who are all now coming to mobile phones and looking for things. And so a lot of what we've been doing is empowering those businesses by providing all the technology back end. And so today we work with thousands of businesses. And over time, what we are beginning to see is a lot of people coming from globally and asking to use our software. Typically, we actually say no because we don't serve anyone that doesn't speak English or a lot of other currencies. But we already have businesses that say, we're okay with that. We're in China, we have a great food tour, or we're in Addis Ababa. So we've got merchants that are all over the world today. But I'm excited about the next journey. So part of the thing is that in the last few months, we raised some more capital, and we'll be utilizing that in order to be able to continue to democratize access to entrepreneurship, but also experiences. I think one thing I'd say also is that the businesses we work with, a lot of them are actually new businesses. I think we have a wave of people who have kind of recognized that we all want to spend our time doing things that are experiential. And so they're creating concepts that didn't exist before. One of them is an escape room concept. I'm sure you guys have all been to them. They didn't exist like 3 years ago, right? And now probably with most cities, there's some kind of escape room where you can go and do these fun puzzles with your friends. And so I think you're really going to see a whole new group of experiences emerge, which I think is really exciting.
Yes, all the way in the back.
Thanks for sharing your story. Incredible. How do you ensure quality in these vendors? And if I'm kind of similar to you. I mean, 28 hours before. How many days I spend before a trip to make it unique for me and calling a friend, blah, blah, blah. I go to your website and I see like everyone's going on this website and going on this trip, and I meet people and I really don't want to relate to, or like I want to do this unique for myself.
Yeah, that's a great question.
How does that,
So just to make sure everyone kind of heard that as well, just asking about how do we make sure the quality is there, and how do you make sure it's the right thing for you, and we're recommending the right things that you would want to do based on your own interests. And I think that's exactly the problem that I identified as well. Actually, what we do is, because we work with thousands of businesses, we collect huge amounts of data around the experiences. So we've collected over 500,000 reviews on the businesses, on every activity, by customers who definitely did the tour. So by owning the underlying in technology, we're able to get feedback from every single customer about what's going on. That feedback's useful for you as a consumer. It's actually useful for the businesses as well, because they're like, oh, wow, like this tour is not performing very well, or this guide isn't doing a great job and has gotten much lower reviews. So what we found is that that is actually very powerful, because you've got data that is from individual customers. We also personalize. So one of the things you'll see in our app or on the website is that you can go in and there's a series of pictures. You can select between, do you want to go car racing or do you want to do a food tour? And from that, we're able to infer your preferences. And so we can start personalizing and giving you things that are relevant to what you want. We even also have themes. So, it might be things to do with kids. And the last thing that we've done is we have a section called Perfect Days, which is ideas from people that you might know or connect with, giving you ideas on cool things that they like to do in cities that they love. And so that might be a fashion designer like Diane von Furstenberg or Tory Burch giving you tips on what they like to do, all the way through to a writer or a journalist. So we kind of we get those perspectives from people. It might be a chef like Wolfgang Puck telling you what he likes to do in LA. And so by getting those perspectives, we can also hopefully layer in some feedback from influencers that you might respect and like as well. So that works very well.
Yeah.
I'm just really thank you, I guess, for your talks. I'm super inspired.
Oh, thank you.
I found, I guess, more clarity on the things that I wanted to do based on what you said. So thank you so much for that. And I guess my question is less about Peak and I guess more about you. And I was just wondering, you mentioned that you were from a community and you were basically the first one to go to Oxford to do something that was different. I was just wondering, what do you consider your best qualities for you to have been able to do that and do other things that kind of broke the boundaries, something that you never saw was possible growing up?
Yeah. Thank you. That's very kind. So I think for me, I was quite fortunate in the sense that I had a certain amount of horsepower to be able to do lots of different things well. And I think if you're an entrepreneur, you definitely need that. I don't think I'm excellent at anything, but I'm pretty good at most things, which means that I can figure things out. And that's a very good quality as an entrepreneur. I think actually coming from a pretty adverse background meant that I've actually been quite used to fighting to try and make things work. So I'm not actually very afraid of failure because frankly, I've failed lots and lots of times, and the path has not been easy. And I think that comfort with knowing that something might not work out makes a big difference, and the resilience and persistence. So I'm pretty sure that even if something didn't work out 10 times, I would be optimistic enough to jump back up again and say, let's give it another go, right? So I think the adverse circumstances, I think, that can sometimes prevent other people from doing it are also incredibly useful for entrepreneurship. There's lots of other careers I probably wouldn't be very good at, and I don't think I'd be very good at working for someone else anymore. But I think all of the things that kind of helped me prepare were there to be a great entrepreneur because you don't take no for an answer, you're willing to push, and it's okay feeling like an outsider. I think I've felt like an outsider my whole life, and that's okay. You can walk into a room and think, I'm not sure I'm like everyone else, but that's fine. And hopefully people who look at me and don't feel like they're like everyone else can think, oh, well, I'm not the only one. Today, I think one of the things for me has been that there are almost 1 billion Muslim women, right? And yet when it comes to role models for those women, there's very, very few. And I think that there's an opportunity, I hope, to share with others that might have come from my background or might have had, might have suffered abuse, who kind of feel like they don't belong, to know that actually you do. And there's lots of different faces and backgrounds that can allow you to be successful and have impact. So I definitely feel an obligation to help everybody else feel that way, whatever you look like or whatever background you've had.
Have you had any role models?
Yeah, I mean, this is potentially quite cheesy, but I think Oprah Winfrey is amazing. I think that for me, her story was really inspiring because she came from a pretty adverse scenario. She didn't necessarily fit in. And I think she carved out a path for herself, which was really about authenticity and her being herself. And I think as you look today, I think one of the impacts she's been able to have is encourage other people to be much more authentic, whilst also having a very positive impact on her own community. So she's somebody, actually, it's funny because when I was at Harvard Business School, we genuinely had a case study on her. And I was like, great, 7 pages of just why Oprah Winfrey is amazing. And so I think someone like that is very, very inspiring, all the way through to, I guess, traditional business leaders who are awesome. And perhaps, the Buddha and others who have been very thoughtful and inspiring in what they do for us in terms of philosophical approaches.
Okay, we have 1 minute left. Like, what drives you? What's your mission? Like, where are you in 10 years, for example?
Yeah, so my mission, I think, is to decrease suffering, to increase opportunity, and to inspire joy. So those are the big things for me that are really important. And so I think when I look at myself in 10 years, I hope that we've inspired a lot of joy with Peak. Whenever we look at the millions of bookings, we're kind of like, well, I think on average there must be at least one smile per experience. So I try to think about millions of smiles that we can give people. And then I think in terms of decreasing suffering and increasing opportunity, I've been very fortunate. Given where I was at, there were not a lot of opportunities. I really feel an obligation to help others increase their opportunity. So I think I'll be doing more things around that, both in terms of Peak, but also other work that I might do in terms of activism and other things. So that's my mission, and I'm really excited to continue doing it. Hopefully not just for 10 years, but for as long as I live, and hopefully we're in the age of potentially living a lot longer than others have.
Great. Okay, you're extremely inspiring and you're extremely courageous. Like courage is your personality summed up. Okay, thank you for sharing your story and thank you for coming.
Thanks so much, guys.